Hello, all you Wookiee warriors. How's it going? So this video has been long overdue. I said I was gonna do it, and this other things kept on popping up, but I'm able to do it now. This video was requested by Leo. Um, he was asking if what was my favorite Star Wars, and go through them, why, and what was so special about them. So I thought I'd go through each one of my favorites. No, and just throwing it out there, I have not seen anything past the movies and Next Generation. So, and I'll probably be covering the movies as well. So starting off, I didn't actually I didn't actually watch the first Star Trek TV show until much later in my life. I grew up, but I did grow up with Captain Kirk. I watched the movies when I was growing up, so I would say, the first Star Trek was really my first favorite, because I grew up with Captain Kirk and the movies. I don't remember all of them off the top of my head. It's been a long time since I've watched them. I probably should have watched them before I did this video, but I remember one of the video movies being like there was no whales in Star Trek. They were extinct. And then there's this probe, this thing that was going to destroy the world, and the only thing that could communicate with it was a humpback whale. So they go on this big adventure, go back in time, and they take the whales and put them back into their timeline, as well as the person who was taking care of them at the time. And Spock is back, which I do remember that Spock actually did die. In one of the movies, he sacrificed himself to save the crew. If I remember correctly, there was like this radiation, which he sealed it off and saved the ship, but he was too badly contaminated with radiation that there was no saving him, and he died. And then there was another movie where the quest to bring back Spock, and they did bring him back, but he was very much like a child. So this took place before that movie I just mentioned about the whales, where they took him back to Sarek to be re-educated before he rejoined Starfleet. And then I think the last one was one of the other movies I watched was which was correlated to one of the episodes. What was his name? Kern. I think his name was Kern. Khan, not Kern, Khan. The Return of Khan. Or was it The Wrath of Khan? Anyway, like we see Captain, during one of the scenes, we see Captain Kirk, yell his name because he's now trapped on this planet, just like Khan was. I don't remember the rest of the movie. I really need to watch these movies again. And then I remember another scene where I'm trying to remember now. I'm trying to remember what I was trying to remember. I need to remember. Now I remember. There was a plot by a faction of, I think it was the Klingons. Not the Klingons, but there was a faction that wanted to get rid of the Federation Council. And there was a plot to assassinate them. And they wanted the Klingons to be at war with them. And not trust the Federation, because the Federation's relationship with the Klingons, even at this time, was iffy at best. I remember going into going into the Warbird And you see the horrific sight, Klingons just floating everywhere. Um, and I think one of the things, I don't mean to gross anybody out in this video, but one of the things I appreciated, I think the most in all of the Star Trek and those movies is how different they made the Klingons. Like if you look at like Romulans, they have green blood. And then you look at that scene and their blood was pink. And I don't think I think after that movie, it was just they didn't really worry too much about that. But it was later on, much later on, I started watching I watched Star Trek Next Generation. And that was where my fascination with Star Trek really started to take off. Like I couldn't get enough of Star Trek Next Generation. I loved all the characters and how well they were written. Like for instance, Captain Picard. I'm sorry, I'm distracted because I'm probably literally using an image of Captain Kirk because it was the only image I could find where there was a captain sitting down. Kirk. I just made a meme. Kirk. Anyway, where Captain Picard was a well-written character. He was a very stoic character. It was a very far-fetched from the captain we knew, where Captain Kirk was, this very lighthearted, very brash captain. He had a sense of honor and code, but he was what was it Spock said in an episode? Cowboy. He was a very cowboy kind of policies, cowboy diplomacy is what he called it. And Captain Picard was very fierce in the ways of the Federation and their laws. And he referenced them quite a lot throughout the show as the directive, the Prime Directive. And he even goes into why it's so important to him. Is that he says it's not just a set of rules, it's a philosophy, and a correct one. Is that time and time again, as history has shown, that anytime society gets involved with a lesser evolved society, bad things happen. So you're getting a lot of respect for the character of Captain Picard. It doesn't mean that he's stiff and stoic. He does have his moments. Like I remember, Captain Picard needed vacation, and Riker being another one of my favorite characters because he's just kind of like the Captain Kirk of the start of Next Generation. He's carefree, he's charismatic. Quite the ladies' man in the show, and they're in a turbo lift, and they're all trying to get him to have this vacation, and they're both in the turbo lift, and Kirk, I keep on saying Kirk, sorry, Picard is like, just knows the conversation is coming, and he's like, please don't. And so he tells him about Risa, which is like Hawaii in like Star Trek terms. And, he tells him to get him a gift, a Horgon. And Picard doesn't know anything about it, and Riker did that on purpose. Is he buys the Horgon when he gets to Risa, and he just packs, he calls it light reading, but his idea of light reading is about this big. That's not light reading for me. that's like a study session. But anyway, he's reading his book, and he keeps on like he's trying to read his book, and people are having a good time, and splash water's on his book, and he dries it. And he keeps on getting these girls coming up to him, and he doesn't know why until one of the girl, I guess one of the the residents there tells him about it, and she says, I think they called it Hormoneron, and I can't, I don't think I'm pronouncing it very right, but it's kind of like, how can I politely say it? It's kind of like having a romantic evening. Let's go with that. We'll just go with that way. You guys can use your own um, thoughts on what Hormoneron is. But it's a very romantic evening. And he's like, why? What's the significance of it? She tells him that. He's like, no, I bought it for a friend. And she says, okay, carry on, have a nice day. And he actually takes it and puts it underneath the towel. And that's where he meets his friend, the archaeologist, who gets in trouble. He thinks she's another resident like that. He says, I don't want her Mojoran. He's like, good, I was an offering, you know. But there's so many great episodes in there, and I love how Star Trek also would teach you. Like they would bring in lessons into each episode. For instance, there's an episode where there was a species. I'm getting ahead of myself. They found a distress call over a downed craft, and they rendered assistance. All were deceased except for one, which they called him John Doe because he had no identification. So, hang on. I came prepared for this video because I know this video is probably going to be a very long video. So John Doe is his body is in constant pain, and we see like this glow comes out of him and comes back. And it wasn't until Dr. Crusher came in and said that his cells were in flux, like they were evolving. She didn't know into what, but his cells were erratic. And he also possessed a gift to heal with people with a touch. He could even bring people back from the dead, as we saw, like by accident. He didn't mean to, but he was just trying to get off the ship to save the ship because he didn't know how violent his transformation was going to become. He didn't want the ship being at risk. But the Enterprise crew didn't know that, and they just said they had a claim that he was a traitor or that he was a criminal. So they had to explore this the claim. So he, Worf says, "I'm not going to hurt you, but you need to come with me immediately." In Worf's fashion, because he's Klingon. Which Worf is like one of the cool. Also, I should throw that out there as one of the another well-written character. We'll get to him in a moment. And he accidentally goes into one of his convulsions and knocks Worf off and breaks his neck on accident. So he goes down while all of them are huddling and like, oh, he's gone, They said, and he basically comes in, puts his hand on him, and his broken neck is fixed, and he is back to life. Now let's get to Worf. I don't think I touched too much on Riker. I've been touching more about the Next Generation. Worf is one of the more interesting characters because he is actually torn between two societies, and the way he is he tries to pay homage to both, but he's constantly in conflict with two worlds. Excuse me. For instance, he's Klingon, but he was not raised on the Klingon Empire. His father, Mutt, I think his name was Mud or Muck. He was a very prominent figure in the Klingon Empire, very well respected. And there was a outpost, which I can't remember the name of it. that he was investigating, and somehow the Romulans, which the Klingon and Romulans never saw eye to eye. The Klingon outpost was destroyed, and him being the only survivor. But two Starfleet captains, or not captains, but officers, found Worf, and he was raised on Earth. So he feels honored. He grew up with the heritage of humans, but he also was a Klingon. And it's something he's even stretched on in the show is there was an episode with two Klingon officers that were hitching a ride on a transport cargo, and they took control of the ship to fight back, and they destroyed two Klingon warbirds. And or it was a 2 or 1, I can't remember in that episode. But anyway, it was found that these guys were radicals, that they believed in creating fighting versus the time of peace, which the Klingons are now living. They believed that the time of peace was just a slow death, that they wanted to fight. And Klingon, and as Worf, as a Klingon, he felt emboldened by these guys. He felt like a certain kinship with them. He felt, as in his words, his heart roars as they do, as he was pleading for this case with one of the captains, but he said it's not his call. Because he said, why don't we just let him have a shuttlecraft, give him a phaser in one hand, and put him on a distant world. He said, if it was up to me, I would. My heartbeat feels as they do, but it is not my call. And Worf chose human and democracy over those two. He eventually saw how what they saw did no longer fit the times. But there's other times where he's also embraced like Klingon traditions. I mean, I shouldn't say he embraced. He's very adamant about respecting his Klingon traditions as well as the human traditions. For instance, when he lost the love of his life, even though they weren't married officially, they were mated. It was his mate, but they never went through the ceremony and stuff, like the full ceremony, which would have been his spouse. She was murdered in one of the episodes, and Worf raged. Like, he ripped off his beads, he took off his badge. He's like, at this moment, I am not a Starfleet officer, and he went to Duras and fought him. And not one of Duras's crew ever stopped that, because in the Klingon tradition, he was in his right to challenge him. Duras like, you have no business on this ship, go away. But all the Klingons like, no, he has every right, dude. But I have a tremendous amount of respect for Worf as a character, because it's not easy being of two worlds. As we saw in another episode where there was a kid, they found a crashed, I can't remember the name of the race, but he grew up, he was a human, but he grew up there because in their tradition, the captain who found him lost his son in this war, so he took up that kid as his son to replace his son. And they were not seeing what was right for the boy. So the boy attacked Captain Picard. He asked him why. He said because he committed a crime, and now he must answer for that crime. But he didn't state the crime was his. It was theirs, because they're forcing the kid to choose between two worlds. Losing one parent and the gain of another family, and he didn't want to lose that family. So, Star Trek always found a way of identifying problems and teaching people. I'm not saying every episode was like that. There was a lot of episodes where it's just pure fun. Like, I love the parts with Q. Q was another. He wasn't a main character, but he was a well-written character. Kind of like a half, like half and half. Like, he was a good guy, and there was times where he was a bad guy. Like, he took the control of he stopped the Enterprise and put the Enterprise on trial for the crimes of humanity being savage, and Captain Picard answered those crimes and said, "Test us," and he did. He never stopped watching them, but he was astounded. The Q and himself were astounded by that. But Q was always like a constant thorn, and like he was even thrown out to continue at one point. But he's always a well-written character. And recently, like I even said, it was shocking when I saw him or I heard him in Assassin's Creed, because he does the voice acting for William Miles, and it's probably one of the few times I've seen the actor get a role where he wasn't a jerk or like a Q. But a lot of the villains in Star Trek were very memorable, and a lot of the species they run across were very memorable. And that was something I really liked about Star Trek. Is I believe Star Trek Next Generation. I don't know if if they had a high budget, but you have to respect them for actually being able to take people and make them believe that they were going to a different place. They were going into seeing different species. Like, the first test they ever did was Q was constantly interfering with it. He's like, "Quickly, destroy it now," and Picard was like, "No." And it turned out the people on Farpoint were using an alien to manufacture stuff. It was weakened and hurt, and they healed it, but it was too weak to do anything. So they were enslaving a higher life form. And Captain Picard issued an order to fire a beam of energy to that planet as much as it can take to that spot. And it turns out that Farpoint was gone, but the life form came up. And the reason why the other entity was so pissed, so mad, that is because these people were hurting its mate, its love. And that was a very beautiful scene. And then we have another one which was a very tragic scene. This entity is called the crystalline entity, which was intelligent. Which is Data. We're getting into Data now, but we'll get to Data after this. Is that Data's brother knew how to communicate with it. But we know that the crystalline entity itself fed on energy, life energy, because every time it finished with a planet, it was just nothing but dust. But we didn't know what it was like in a comic scheme of things. What was it for? Could we communicate with it? Could we find other means for it to live? These were the questions Captain Picard wanted answered. But instead, the scientist destroyed the crystalline entity because she felt that her son was living in Data. And she said, "I did it for you, son." I think his name was Ronnie. And Data said, "I don't believe your son would be happy about this. I think he would be saddened." Now let's get on to Data, another very well-written character. Data is an android who wishes to be human. Or I shouldn't, yeah, that's his inspiration. He's an android, but he wants to be human. which leads Q to kind of make fun of him for a bit. He's like, to be honest, this being human is not what it's cracked up to be. But he always loved the aspiration of humanity. And Captain Kirk often referred to Data as being the most exemplary human. As Data would give himself up, like he would face destruction, if it meant saving a human life. One human life, he would give up his life for it. Without hesitation, without reservation. But Data also in the series was another conflict. There was a time where people didn't see him as a sentient life form. He saw them as just computers and chips. And one of the hardest things Riker's ever had to do is at this time there was no there was no office for the judge advocates. So they had to make it up with the current cast, or the current crew of the Enterprise, which was on the defense was Picard, and then on the prosecution was Riker. And Riker, he took his arm off, and then he says, "Now I'll shut the machine off," and he shut him down. It was very damning in that scene, and then Picard puts his in, and it was also very moving. He says, "Why are these things important to you?" Like there was Tasha Yar and Data had a relationship, and then there's a book that Captain Picard gave him, and then the medals. And he says, "Why are these things important to you?" And then at the very end of the movie, the end of the episode, Data gets recognized. Even the scientist who wanted to take him apart issued that he was unique. He said he was a Morocco, not it. But it's always his inspiration to be more human, having emotions. Even Q gives him a time for laughter. Like he's like, "Data, what's so funny?" He's like, "I don't know." Even Spock says there are many Vulcans who aspire to be what you were naturally given. No emotion, pure calculation. But you have funny moments with Data, like you see him like in his quarters, practicing to sneeze, practicing laughter. He even grows himself a beard, and it's funny. It's like Geordi comes in. We'll get to Geordi in a minute. Another one of my favorite characters. He's like, "Data, did you damage your face?" He's like, "No, I just grew a beard. Because Riker has a beard, you have a beard. Isn't a beard something that's is a sign of intellect?" And both him and Castro Troy are just trying not to laugh, but she ends up leaving and laughing hysterically. He's laughing hysterically. Did I do something wrong? And he ends up taking the beard off. But also another thing that Data does is he paints. Something that was brought onto an episode with Tin Man now. That's another one of my favorite episodes. I'll shed some light on that. Where he paints, and you would expect paint by numbers, but there's actually creativity. There's feeling in each one of these paintings, as well as he acts. He also plays musical, and it's funny. It's like Captain Picard is coming in to watch his recital. And even Data suggested that he gets to the next show because when the guy says Data doesn't have soul, and he listened to it, and he said, "Well, if you need further proof of this, sure, you copy Brahms and other artists, but it's how you combine them that's unique." And he was shocked when Data said there's nothing unique about him. He's just playing. He's a computer just playing it. Like, no, that's not it. Now, getting on to the episode I was talking about, Tin Man was another one. It was an amazing episode where we find this life form that's not just a life form, it's also a ship that ferried other life forms to other destinations, but there was a terrible accident and the whole crew died. And Tin Man was very sad. And he tells one of the characters, I can't remember his name, understood this, and he said, Tin Man knows the sun is going nova. It wants to die. It wants to reach its crew. And he eventually goes over there, and he basically becomes Tin Man's friend and crewmate, therefore completing Tin Man. It's a very magical episode, and there's a lot of magical episodes. Star Trek had a way, like, no matter how many episodes you watch, they're always unique, always different. Moving on to Star Trek, I guess you could say OG, original Star Trek 1, where we meet Captain Picard, or Captain Kirk. I've been mixing them up all video long. But although the first episode you don't see Captain Kirk, and that was why I was asking myself, like, wait a second, I thought this was like the era of Captain Kirk, which we actually go with Pike. And after watching it, I wish we would have had more screen time with Pike. Up until the point where he had that accident. Because that's how he retired. He became an admiral. But he also, due to the accident, he was found into a wheelchair. And at that point, that's when Captain Kirk took over. And Captain Kirk is a very well-written character. He's funny, charismatic. He doesn't do. He's very unorthodox in his command, but he does try to follow the Prime Directive a lot. He follows the rules. There was even an episode where he was put on trial, but it wasn't because of him. There was a officer which he eventually took off the Enterprise because how spiteful he was that he was captain and the other guy wasn't. And so to do that, he tried to damage his career by saying he made a mistake under. He panicked, and Captain Kirk's like, no. And it was later found out that it was doctored, that he messed with the log. But I admire the original Star Trek because it really did what Star Trek Next Generation did. I think Star Trek Next Generation had a much bigger budget than the original one did. With all the special effects they were able to pull off on it. Because if you look at most of all the scenes, anytime they go to a new world, it's always orange screen, green, bluish. It was just a plain screen. It wasn't like they had stars. That was another thing. But despite that, you are able to feel that you are going to different worlds. You encounter different life forms. For instance, that Spock and the others didn't. A lot of people didn't like Spock for a few reasons. Is that they thought he was too cold-blooded, but he was just being logical. As a few of the members had passed, and two of the members wanted to do a burial, but Spock said that would not be wise because of the hostilities, but they said, no, we're going to do it anyway. So they do, and these two guys actually get into trouble. And Spock and a few others go and rescue them. Um, and we don't actively see the aliens for a while. That we just see them throwing these spears, and you know the spears are faked because they look like plastic or something you make in like a craft class. But it didn't matter that's what they looked like. The emotions were real. Were well done, I should say. The scene was well acted, um, and it made people believe about the hostility. So eventually they get up and they get back on the Enterprise, but the whole experience to that point, because they only had one way, because they couldn't go back completely back into orbit. So they dumped the fuel to make this one pass around the planet, so the Enterprise could see it, and the Enterprise does see it, and they get rescued. There's also some funny episodes. Like there was one episode in the Star Station where the Klingons and humans were there, and they were supposed to not cause a problem. And let's go on the Klingons for a second. The Klingons in the original Star Trek were so vastly different than what we saw in Star Trek Next Generation, or even the movies. They looked human. And it's absolutely like the real reason why they look that way, because they couldn't afford like big makeup sessions like we see in Star Trek Next Generation. But the way they downplayed it was perfect. They did the lore behind it perfect. It's like the reason why the Klingons looked that way is because there was a virus that swept through the civilization, and one scientist tried to cure that, but by doing so, they looked less Klingon. They took more of their Klingon attributes out, and they were left with human-looking Klingons. So it's really cool how they were able to do that. But like I said, I think the original Star Trek had a much lower budget than Star Trek Next Generation did. Which is, I think, why you didn't see like a whole lot of episodes where there was a lot of alien activity. Like there was one alien, like an entity, where one of the characters was this pilot that went missing, and the entity was able to grant human life. And eventually, it was able to take human form, but by doing so, both him and her would live out the remainder of their days. There would be no more immortality. I'm not saying that there wasn't good alien types. Like there was the famous episode with the Doomsday Machine. There was an episode with like humans going on. Well, I think they were a different race, but they looked human, going from their on an asteroid ship going to Utopia. But the problem is the computer malfunctioned. Then there was an episode with androids, actually multiple ones. And then there was a character kind of like Q. Not Q, I should say, not like the one we would know, but he was a very funny character who was called Mud. He was a smuggler. But he was like, no, I'm not smuggling. And they have like a full record, and he's like, no, that's not right. He's a really funny character. And I think mostly it felt more like the Enterprise was more on diplomatic missions than they were on alien exploration. But there were alien interactions. But it truly is a marvel when you see Star Trek, the original, and the things they were able to pull off on it. Like there was a being, the way they phrased it was there was a being so ugly they would drive men mad. The only person that didn't drive mad was a girl who couldn't see him. She was blind. Other than Spock. Spock almost went blind. But again, he didn't see the thing as ugly or hideous. He just saw it as a being. But the problem was, like Spock, the entity liked Spock's body so much that he didn't want to let go, but it was killing Spock. So eventually it returned. Trying to think. Let's talk about the characters for a moment. Like we have Scotty. Everyone knows Scotty. I don't think there's a person alive today that has never heard the phrase "Beam me up, Scotty." Scotty is one of my favorite characters. I know I have a lot. You've heard me say that a lot, but there's a lot of Star Trek characters I like, and Scotty was one of them because he had a good way of adding a certain charm to the show. Like he had just that Scottish charm. There was an episode where they were trying to oversensitize. These aliens took on human form and were being overwhelmed by the sensory or feelings of humans. So Scotty's like, I know how to do that right off. And so one of them was actually eating across the way from him. He's like, laddie, you need something to wash that down with. Have you ever heard of Sarian and Ice Blandy? I'm sorry, I can't do a really good Scottish accent. That's the best I can do. So the course of the episode, from that point of the episode, Scotty's in his quarters just like downing everything. And the alien's like, very interesting. Is there more? It's like, not like this, anything. So they start drinking everything, and there's a special episode in Star Trek Next Generation where Scotty makes an appearance. And this is where that cameo is from, is he's like, what is this? It's green. And they pulled 4 glasses and gone. And he's like, is there more? It's like, all I've got is a very, very, very old bottle of scotch. And he's like, well, I will try it. And he's like, well, I will get it. And he has it stashed behind an armored plate of a knight. And he goes, oh, I was saving you. He's like, never mind. Here's your glass. And they both drink like he actually blows off dust on this bottle of scotch, and that's like how old it is. And finally he's like, very interesting, I feel. And he goes, bonk. And he's like, Scotty's like, we did it. We put him right under the table, you and me. And gives it the bottle a nice kiss, and takes the communicator or whatever they have in their belt. And he's like, better take this to the captain. And he makes it as far as the door, and then he goes, and falls right to the floor and passes out. Now you gotta think, that's a lot of alcohol those guys just consumed. I mean, what like, it was like probably realistic, like 5 or 6 tall bottles of alcohol. Yeah, what a trooper. Although in the original Star Trek, Scotty doesn't have a mustache. And I was like, I thought he always had a mustache. Nope, it wasn't until the movies he started growing that mustache. And must have put on a few pounds because he was not rounded as he was in the movies. Not saying that's bad. I'm a big guy myself. Then I think we talked about Spock. Everyone knows Spock. He's very calculating, but he has like that fine line between human and Vulcan. Like there was an episode where Spock had to become like his species has kind of like this love drive. I'm gonna call it that, and they take him to Vulcan to take care of that, but he ends up having to do battle, and he accidentally thinks he killed Kirk, but he didn't. It wasn't a atmosphere pill. It was a pill that would give him the effect of death. So when he's back on the ship, he's overjoyed that Captain Kirk is alive and well. But I like one of my favorite things is that he treats anything like he makes a joke and he's like, "My Spock, is that a joke we hear from you?" And he's like, "Captain, I don't see any reason why I should stand here and be insulted." Because that's how he thinks. Like every time he makes a crack or a laugh or something like that, and if someone comments on it, he's being insulted. But Captain Kirk always kind of makes a little bit of fun of, pokes fun at Spock. And so does Dr. McCoy. One of my other favorite characters is McCoy. Because McCoy is more, how is it? I think it was from the movie The Mummy, where the guy's like, "Why can't you people ever keep your feet on the ground?" Saying that he likes riding horses more than he does flying, which is interesting because there's a scene in I think it's The Mummy 2, like he's never been on a plane before, and he's like, it's probably the worst seat ever. He's on the wing of the plane. He's like, and they O'Connell screams over like, "Hey, how you doing?" He's like, "This is amazing." But he doesn't like transporters. He doesn't like he likes Spock, but he always pokes fun at him because Spock always would say, act so cold-hearted, and he's like, how can you be so damn cold-blooded? He would also make cracks about him having pointed ears. He would call them knife ears, or something like that. He would poke fun at him. Which actually makes a cameo in Star Trek Next Generation after Picard takes over. On his first day, there's a tour given by a very old man, and if you guys watched the first Star Trek, you know who that is. I didn't know until I watched it. That's McCoy walking the ship at, I don't know, 100-some years old, and he's like, "How do you?" And that's another thing with Data. He told me exactly how old he was, and like, "How do you know my age?" Exactly. I remember every information I'm exposed to, sir. I don't see no ears on your head, boy, but you sound like a Vulcan. And Data goes over to him. He says, I thought Vulcans were an honorable race." He's like, they are, but damn annoying at times. But he just had that southern charm he brought to Star Trek. And I just loved his character and how he interacted with the crew. He even chimed at Captain Kirk at times where until Captain Kirk said, "That's enough, Bones." Which is funny is that Captain Kirk never called him McCoy, he called him Bones. I guess that was like his way, is like an inner joke for him since he was the medical officer. I mean, we have the other characters which we are introduced to, like Chekhov, who believes that Russia invented everything. It's like, yes, Russia. That was from Russia. And Kirk actually chimes in once about it. He's like, really? Yes. He's like, interesting. Can you tell us more? He also says the same thing to other crew members when something happens. He's like, oh yes, that was invented in Russia. So anything was in Russia. And then we had, oh man, I can't remember his name. Damn it. Sulu. I was actually looking it up. Sulu. Another one of my favorite characters. He was an expert in a lot of areas, but he also said to one of the ensigns, because the ensigns were making a joke towards, was making a joke at Spock, and he fired right back at him and kind of embarrassed him, broke him down, and he's like, "That's what you get for locking horns with Spock." The guy just kind of like, bitch. Yes, I am gonna. Sorry for swearing if that offends anybody, guys. Also, he was an expert in fencing, which I thought it would be more like he was an expert in like katana or something like that, but no, he was an expert in fencing, and he had a dream of being like a musketeer. Who else? I can't remember her name. The communications officer. She had a beautiful voice. There was actually an episode where her intelligence actually gets wiped, and she had to relearn everything. Oh, good Lord, we've been talking for almost an hour. I think in closing, I would say that the original Star Wars are my favorite, but all-time favorite, because I grew up with it, I grew up with the characters, I would have to say Star Trek: The Next Generation, which is why I chose the Bridge of the Next Generation as for this video, and Captain Kirk as the captain sitting in the chair. Although if I could have found a picture of Captain Picard sitting down, I probably would have put him there. I probably would put all the officers in there as well, but I couldn't find all the officers sitting down. I hope you guys like this video. I went kind of nerdy on this, which is wonderful. If you guys have any more suggestions for videos you guys would like to see, or for me to talk about, leave them down in the comments section below. I love reading you guys' comments. I love you guys' suggestions. You guys are absolutely amazing. If you guys are new to the channel and you guys want to see more content from me, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, as well as that like button and that notification bell. I stream on a regular basis, and I try to get videos out to you guys on a regular basis. Again, any suggestions for new videos coming up, or any suggestions for videos that you guys would like to see, just put them in the comment section below. Also, quick update: there will be the next video will be Star Wars related. Kind of like what my opinions are on the current canon and my current opinion on the state of love Star Wars, which I don't think is going to change, be different from most other Star Wars fans, but I still want to put my opinion out there for you guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. You guys are absolutely amazing. I hope you guys are all having a Wookiee-tastic day, and I'll see you all on our next adventure. And I hope you guys understand when I say this. Engage. Actually, I was thinking about something else, but that's Star Wars related. To our next frontier. See you guys then. See ya.